I have to admit that I feel I was the beneficiary of what Michael Pollan recently called the two-tiered food system. As in, there's food that's safe and healthy that some of us have access to, and then there's food that isn't healthy and that isn't safe that the rest of us eat. I used to always shop at the food co-ops, and I assumed that shopping at the food co-ops meant that I was buying and feeding my family's non-GMO food. Then I found out one day that the cereal I was feeding my children every day had 90% GMO soy in it. And I was really shocked. I went to my food co-op and said, how can you sell this? And they said, well, people buy it, what can we do? And since then I've talked to farmers who say, well, I don't want to grow GMOs, but people want to buy GMO foods. And I've talked to seed suppliers who say, I don't believe in GMOs, but people want to buy GMO seeds. And it just became clear that there's nobody in this system that wasn't stuck. The only people in the system that had the leverage and the capacity to change it were consumers and citizens and people who could take labeling to the state legislatures and make labeling happen and force the issue. This has only been 15 years that we have had genetically modified foods infiltrate our food system. We have to walk it back. We've been farming for thousands of years. There's no reason that we can't walk this back. As many of you probably know, when the FDA first started regulating these foods in the early 1990s, their own scientists raised concerns about these foods. They said they didn't know what the human implications were on health. They were worried about new allergens. They were overruled by a Bush White House who told the FDA, your job is to support the biotech industry. And that's what they did. We're unusual in this country in that we believe the FDA is protecting us. In Europe, they know their regulatory agencies aren't protecting them. In the United States, we believe that they are. But that's what they did. A former Monsanto attorney wrote the regulations that govern GMOs at the FDA, and to this day, the only safety testing required on GMO foods is done by the agrochemical companies that sell these products. So they've become, as you know, widespread in the U.S. food system. Corn, soy, canola, sugar beets, cottonseed. If you're buying it at a grocery store, it's most likely GMO. And this is despite the fact that animal studies link it to infertility, organ damage, cancers, allergies. The University of Minnesota's own Food Policy Research Center found that about half the studies show some risk. And as a parent, I want to say, if I'm taking a risk, if I'm putting my children at risk, the least that I deserve is to know. The least I deserve is to have that information on the label so I can make the decision. All three of my children have food allergies. I've never had a food allergy in my life, so it took me a while to figure out what was going on with them. But if you have young children today, you know that food allergies are epidemic. You can't take cupcakes to a picnic anymore because the kids can't eat them. I went with my 5-year-old son to a birthday party. They served a nut-free, wheat-free, dairy-free cake. Our children's bodies are rejecting normal foods. I've talked to farmers who said they're taking their livestock off GMO feed because their livestock are infertile and they're sick. And we're still feeding these foods to our children. This is the first generation in human history that has been raised since before birth on genetically modified foods. We have no idea what that's going to do. We have yet to find out. What's happening around the world is that people are realizing that their central governments are bought out by the biotech industry. And people are realizing that it's going to be up to them on the grassroots level to make this change. So municipalities around the world are banning GMOs. They're requiring labeling. They're starting to ban imports. They're banning cultivation. This is all happening on the grassroots level, and it's not because of the central government, it's in spite of them that this is happening. Washington, D.C. is no different. As many of you know, more than 1 million comments were sent to the FDA over a year ago telling them, we demand GMO labeling in this country, and they did nothing. And that's why when we started the Coalition of States for GMO Labeling, we started with 14 states, and now we have 37 states, plus Canada. There are people in the U.S. who've been talking about labeling, working on this issue, worried about GMOs for more than 20 years, and they have said they have never seen a grassroots movement like they have seen in the last 2 years. There's also nonprofit advocacy organizations that have worked on this issue. They've been working in isolation on these campaigns, and someone told me from one of those nonprofit advocacy organizations that the entire movement is turned upside down. They're now scrambling to try to support the grassroots energy in this country around this issue. So we've come a long way just in the last couple years. So what can each of us do? This is what it really comes down to, because there's really nobody but us. I'm a full-time mother. I also work. I don't even really have time to work on this. None of us do. But we have to do it. We have to do it, and our children are going to thank us someday. There was a labeling advocate in Connecticut where they just passed, the Connecticut Senate 35-1 passed GMO labeling on Tuesday. The Vermont House, after 2 years of hard work by dedicated volunteers just like all of us, they passed GMO labeling last month. So it's working. The grassroots movement is working. But what I've really realized, and what I think we all need to realize, is no one's going to save us on this one. Nobody's coming to our rescue. The federal government is not coming to our rescue. Even the state's not coming to our rescue. It's really going to be up to us to make right buying decisions and to say, we demand GMO labeling. What you can do. What I'd ask you to do is, number one, call your legislator. People think legislators are hearing from people. They're not really hearing from that many people. If they get 3 or 4 phone calls, it's a groundswell. They know that 300 or 400 people are worried about something, thinking about something, want action on something. So every single call you make to the Minnesota House and the Minnesota Senate saying you support these GMO labeling bills, every single one of those calls counts. We've got an uphill battle in the Minnesota State Capitol because we're an ag state. We grow 80%, 90% GMO corn and soy. But 9 out of 10 of us want GMOs labeled. So we can make it happen. Every one of us who wants GMOs labels needs to take action. Visit your legislator. That's the best thing to do. If you can't visit, call them. If you can't call them, write to them. Sign up on righttoknowmn.org to get involved in this campaign. But most of all, think about how you can help get these bills passed. You know, it just takes creative energy, and it takes people all over this state. We have grassroots community campaigns going on now in cities across the state, and they are going to their local media, and they're getting editorials in their paper, and they're getting on the radio, and they're talking about GMOs. Sunlight is the enemy of Monsanto. What we need to do is we need to get the word out about this, and every one of you can help do that. The industry is set to unveil a national campaign, a public relations campaign to try to defeat these labeling efforts in states across the country. They're going to use moms and farmers. They're going to take them to these conferences where they tell them all the good things about the biotech industry and then ask them to write on their blogs and tell their stories. And they've got tons of money so they can do this. But we've got more people, you know, and we've got the truth on our side. So there's just no doubt that we can win. The tide is already turning, really. I know you know the saying that first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. The good news is we're in phase 3, okay? They're already fighting us. Somebody asked me about a year and a half ago, have you had any opposition yet? And I said, no, not really. And they said, why not? And I said, because we haven't posed a credible threat. Now we are posing a credible threat in states across the nation. And they're paying attention, and they're waking up, and they're realizing they got to do something about this. They're in damage control. The messages that they've been using are not working anymore. They've been talking about reducing pesticides. It increases pesticides. They're talking about how it's good for farmers. Farmers keep telling us they want to get out of this rat race. So they're off their game, and we have an opportunity. We have a window of time and a moment that we can seize right now to make GMO labeling happen. So we're in phase 3. The 4th phase is winning. We're planning on doing that next year. Next legislative session, we're going to have built a powerful statewide campaign, and we're going to let our legislators know that we demand GMO labeling in this state. If the federal government's not going to do it, we're going to take it in our hands, and we're going to do it for them. Thank you.
I was toting my pack along the fields and countryside when along came a crop duster spraying some damn pesticide. It burned my eyes and throat. I couldn't find no place to hide. So I flagged down a funky trip on his way to the March Against Monsanto rally at St. Paul, Minnesota, and I settled down inside. And he asked me if I'd seen so much poison sprayed by just one man. And I said, listen, they're spraying everywhere in this here land. They're spraying everywhere, men, they're spraying everywhere. Across America's farmland, polluting the soil and the water, man. They're spraying all over this world. They're spraying everywhere.